England versus India, the second test at Lords, a classic, a beautiful finish, one of those proper long shadows across the pitch on day 5, right to the jaws of the timekeepers at the very end, 8 overs to go when the match was decided. It's never got any less special that when the finish comes that late and you still don't know which way it's going to go. It's, I've seen my share of them now, and they're special every time.
They are superb. When I first started commentating, our very first test match was the Cardiff test of 2009. Wow. I was spoilt, kind of, really. And England actually had 2 more blinders in the following series against South Africa in 2009-10, where they were 9 down each time. Graham Onions was the hero on those occasions, Panesar and Anderson at Cardiff. And I found myself in the hot seat again yesterday. And you're right, there is something absolutely magnificent about counting down the balls. After tea, there were 38 overs left. That was 228 balls. And then you counted down below 200, and then that partnership between, Moeen Ali and Buttler to begin with. But the way the wickets went, suddenly, Geoffrey Boycott says rather tediously, I had 2 wickets this year. And weirdly, you did have to, because England kept losing 2 wickets in little clusters. Siraj was on a hat-trick twice in that match, wasn't he?
Yep.
And when Curran went, it was all over. England had definitely lost. And then Robinson and Buttler, they were really good, actually. They were really gutsy. As you say, the shadows were lengthening. In my mind's eye, I could see that incredible picture of the Tide Test. That wonderful one leaping in the air, arms aloft when the run-out happens. And it was like that, sort of every ball. It was getting closer and closer to that. And then for me, the moment of the game... there are some miserabilists on Twitter who don't think it to be the case, but it was a great, great moment when Bumrah changed his angle, came round the wicket, and it looked at that point, what was there left then? About 9.1 overs, I think, something like that, or 9.2 overs. And he started to think they're going to do this, they've got this in the bag. Then Bumrah bowling a 7th ball in an over, because he bowled that kind of wide no-ball thing. And he did that a bit in this test match. And it was just that last ball.
About 30
just a bit. We'll come to that. I mean, the Anderson over. But then he comes around the wicket, and of course the umpire doesn't think that can be LBW. How can you bowl with that action round the wicket and pitch it on line and hit the stumps? Well, because he's just pulled off a beautiful piece of skill. The off-cutter to land just on the line of leg stump. Slower, 72 miles an hour, bamboozling Robinson, who's expecting the quicker ball every time. It goes through those groping defences that are there a fraction of a second too early. Up go the fielders, they're convinced. Kohli waits in that marvellous dramatic fashion. Then, he's going to go for it. It's shown to be out. And you think, oh my God, this is India's again, probably. But Butler's still there. Will Buttler now be farming the strike? Has he now got to protect Wood? Well, Butler's brain was scrambled. He batted terribly well, actually. He batted really, really well, because it's not his game. Gets the thin edge. And then the wicket to win it. What a beautiful ball. In the euphoria and the madness of what happened, I think we haven't really spent long enough gazing at what a wonderful ball that was. Because Anderson, unlike Stuart Broad, is actually prepared to get onto the front foot and risk his life. and he'd covered the off-stump. You look at the replays, you go, well, he's covered off-stump. Somehow the ball snake-charmed its way around the outside of his bat and then just comes in and hits the stumps. Pandemonium ensues, and a game that India most definitely were on course to win at the end of day 1, and most definitely had no chance of winning at all at the beginning of day 5. They won. The wonderful, the captivating craziness of the narrative of Test cricket. It was startlingly good fun.
And from day 1 all the way through, what I loved about that match, one of the things, was the discipline coming through from the Indian batsmen. So Rohit Sharma and KL Rahul in the first innings, just the way they played inside the line of everything all day. And, they are white ball crusaders. You think of them as attacking to the point of reckless. Rohit Sharma does have that problem with continuing to play the pull shot that gets him out. But in that first innings, they just said, okay, we've been sent in. The conditions are against us. We're just not going to give England any satisfaction. And to put on a 100-run partnership under those conditions, the way that Rohit kept the run scoring going. I mean, one of them made 100 and one of them didn't, but Rowett's innings was worth 100 in terms of what it did for the side. And then the way that spills over into the second innings with Pujara and Rahane, that partnership that they put on. I mean, the amount of criticism that those two get for batting slowly at times, particularly Pujara, they put on an even 100-run stand. They were 3 for 55 when they came together. You know, they're 25 runs in front or whatever it is. There is no way India can win if one of them gets out then. But they put on that 100. They take the lead up to 136, was it? And at that point, you know, if the rest of your batting order can put together another 30 or 40, you've got a reasonable target to bowl at. You might not win, but you might. They were the difference there. You know, the tail end partnership with Bumrah and Shami was the unexpected thing that made India's position impregnable. But even if that hadn't happened, India would still have been some chance to be able to pull off a win, given the work that those guys did. They batted for 49 and a half overs to put on those 100 runs. And they also just took enough time out of the game that it meant that it wasn't England's game anymore by the time they got out. Even though they didn't go on to big scores, they still did something that was really important.
Yeah, I mean, look, Indian cricket fans, I guess, are no different from all cricket fans. They see things in complete binary. And when someone gets out or is going through a poor trot, then they're rubbish, and you've got to get rid of them. And it's tough, I guess, for India because they've got so much talent waiting in the wings. You know, they are blessed with a huge number of alternatives. So everything comes down to selection for Indian Twitter. But those guys, you're absolutely right. What a partnership it was, because England had their tails up then. When Kohli got out, there was euphoria in the England camp. It was the only major contribution Sam Curran made to the entire Test match, really. Well, I mean, apart from becoming the first man in the history of a Lord's Test to bag a king pair, which is an achievement of sorts, poor lad. But it was a superb partnership. I'd take slight issue with them getting India into... I mean, well, no, I mean, you're right. They got them to a position where they could defend. But those late wickets on that day put England back on top. And actually, they kept on going that following morning, on the Friday morning, when Robinson, with a brilliant knuckle ball, again, great bit of white ball skill in a red ball game, slower ball to take that wicket. But the damage, I'm afraid, was done to the English psyche when they allowed Bumrah's over to Jimmy Anderson to get under their skin. Because the moment Bumrah came out to bat, this is a guy who had got fewer runs than wickets in his Test career, 93 wickets, 71 runs, I think, at the point he came out to bat. Full and straight. They've got Stuart Broad in their own side. They know how to get out a tail-ender. You bowl a bouncer, which he might edge or wallop over deep mid-wicket, and then you bowl the full ball. But England didn't. They kept peppering him in a form of retribution. And actually, had they gone through Bumrah and Siraj and been set a target of 170... well, Kohli wouldn't have been able to set the fields he did. They wouldn't have been able to attack the way they did. England wouldn't have been so nervous. You know, when England went out to bat, they knew they couldn't win the game. If they'd needed 180 in 75 overs, there would have been a lot more calm there. So I think that innings was a tale of two partnerships. One was constructed by two brilliant batters playing perfect Test cricket. The other was gifted by one of the most extraordinary collective brain fades I've witnessed on a cricket field. I mean, there was an hour and a half of almost impossible to understand cricket. And then, to cap it all, Geoff, Kohli wasted 4 overs after lunch. The wonderful side of Mohammed Shami changing his thigh guard. He was brought 2 thigh guards so he could choose. Because at the highest level, you get to choose which thigh guard you like, right? He then faced 1 ball, which he edged through the slips, and he trooped off. There were 3 balls still left in the over. None of it made any sense. And I genuinely thought, during the Robinson-Butler partnership, that the loss of those 4 overs could come back to bite Kohli. But in fact, nothing was going to bite Kohli that day. He had this wonderful team talk where he got everyone together. I don't know if you saw it. And he said, no one is smiling at these English batters. This next 60 overs has got to feel like hell for them out there. And they did. The intensity was what was so exciting. And there was a little bit of poor batting, but the pressure that was on them, the other part of it, which is difficult to communicate really, but at Lord's on day 5, it's the kind of the day, it's like a people's day. It's like sort of middle Sunday in Wimbledon if it's rained, you know, when suddenly anybody troops up, because you can't buy tickets in advance for day 5 as a general rule. So suddenly they're like 20 quid, and families of Indians turned up, and the whole nature of the crowd was not champagne corks popping from, rather tedious men in blazers. Mm-hmm. It was a bit more like the Women's World Cup final, where there was this sort of festive, wonderful atmosphere. And that atmosphere and that sort of that partisan Indian crowd was in there as well, combined with the almost psychotic intensity of Kohli, backed up by Siraj, who was just wondrously menacing and constantly attacking the stumps, finding movement where there was none. Even when the sun came out, he was getting it to boomerang. It was just electrifying. The hairs on the back of your neck stood up. It was something that you only ever see in Test cricket. And as you said right at the beginning, the framework of it, counting down the balls, can they survive? Can they survive? And it was better that they didn't, really, because the anticlimax. I've seen those 9-wicket down draws, and there's a horrible anticlimax. The last ball, even if it's your side, it's like, yeah, what do we do now? Oh, well, we've drawn. Whereas, the theatre of the stumps being hit, and by the guy who was kind of central to that bowling performance, Siraj, it was a wonderful, wonderful denouement. And any thought of fandom just flies out of your mind when you're calling a game like that, or I dare say watching it. You just marvel at the spectacle. It was beautiful. Bringing tears to my eyes, Jeffrey.
If we look at the England side of it, I mean, Joe Root is starting to look like a sort of late career Brian Lara at the moment, where it's just him. He's it. He's the one who might be able to do something ridiculous to win you a game or save you a game, but if he doesn't, then no one else can. Which, probably puts its own kind of pressure on him. You said that England were never going to be able to chase that target, and they probably weren't, coming out at needing 4.5 and over across the end of the day. I did think, though, that completely surrendering the possibility of it didn't help. I really want it, and maybe this is naive and maybe this is playing fantasy cricket, but what I wanted to see, what I in my dreams would have liked to have seen, was to have England reshuffle their batting order and say, all right, you've got 3 guys at the top who cannot score. Whether they get out or not, they can't score. They could bat for the rest of the day and they won't score. But you've got stroke makers further down the order. You've got players who can put pressure back on bowlers. Why not consider moving it around? Why not consider fashioning a top 3 out of Buttler, Bairstow, Moeen? You keep Root at 4, and so that if those guys up the top are going well, then Root can come in and support them. If it doesn't work and they're out cheaply, then he can try to repair things. You've got your Stonewallers down the order who can try to bat things out if things become a draw. And it seemed like that might have been a clearer way to approach it. If you had, Burns, Sibley, Hamid coming in down the order, knowing that they just had to save the game, that might be different to coming in up the top where they've still got the entire innings to bat. And the fact that there was no consideration of that, it certainly wasn't as egregious as the New Zealand Test a couple of months ago at Lords, where they needed about the same sort of target, 270 odd in 75 overs rather than 60 overs that time. And again, they didn't even bother to go for it; they just shut up shop and batted out the draw. It really it's so at odds with England as a white ball team at the moment, where they're in limited overs cricket. They're all about boldness. They're about seizing the game, and in Test cricket, they're about hiding from the game and hoping it doesn't find them. There was no imagination, there was no spark, there was precious little heart. And I think this is to do with the coaches and the administration as well, like the sort of leadership nexus of this whole England Test squad. It just, honestly, it comes across to me as spineless.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say that. I think it is a fantasy. I don't think any other side would do it, but you make a strong case for why England of all teams should, because they had in that lineup, as you say, Buttler, Bairstow, Moeen Ali, Joe Root, who are 4 mainstays of their white ball side. So they're very much aware of how courageous, bold attacking cricket works for them in one scenario. But Test cricket is a weird beast, and every country grows up with its own culture of Test cricket. And the English culture of Test cricket has mostly speaking been caution. It's been a bit South African in a way. And that doesn't just go away overnight. And what there also is a fear of how you would look. Because if England were, 25 for 3 and Root was one of them because they'd just gone on the offensive and Bairstow had got out early because he's not used to playing against the moving new ball, and Butler doesn't open against a red ball and hasn't had much red ball cricket, then they would have been pilloried. So they sort of job forward to imagining how badly people will take it if they lose, rather than, as you say, put that to one side. Your only way, actually, of having control of those 60 overs is to try to force control away from Kohli and his bowlers. Because if you go out there and block, as they did, then you're just saying to yourself, right, well, we've just got 60 overs of sheer hell to endure here. Can we do it? But I guess in part they were also looking at that pitch that they'd bowled on themselves, which died. I mean, England, partly their tactics were dreadful with the ball, but partly, notwithstanding Wood's injury to his shoulder, they couldn't really extract anything from that pitch. Even someone like Robinson, who tends to hit a pitch hard and get movement, having it jag around, was finding the ball dying in the surface. So I think their calculation was that even if we go after it, there's just not enough in the wicket for us to get anywhere. And also, look, this is a really, really good pace attack. This Indian pace attack keeps coming at you. There's 4 of them. Shami was the weak link in this game. Now, when Shami's your weak link, you've got a pretty good lineup, haven't you? So I think there's a bit of realism. Over-realism comes in. I take all the points you make there. Rather than focus on that, to me, it was all about the irresistibility of the Indian performance and how they managed to... They picked a fight, and they're good at that. Once they've got the fight, it works for them. What England were bad at, for me, was... they allowed the fight to be picked. Anderson needed to walk off with his bruises and say nothing and smile, and Root needed to smile and, slap on the back. You've not risen to it, then you don't lose your mind in the crucial moment in that 5th morning session. I think that's a really big part of it. The other part, also from just seeing the conditions, it was pretty dark. Not dark enough for bad light, but it makes seeing it more difficult. It makes batting in it in an aggressive way more difficult. It wasn't particularly warm. There were loads of things that counted against him. That's the beauty of Test cricket. But you do also touch on Root. And can I give you a stat? Because I think you'll like this stat.
Go on.
So Joe Root this year, already in the middle of August, just after the Anschluss of Austria, has scored 1,277 runs, which is in and of itself a very good year, and he's got plenty more to give. The next highest scoring English batter is Rory Burns. He has scored 363 runs. The difference between Root and Burns is therefore 914 runs. That seems like a lot, doesn't it? Now, I'll put into context just how much of a lot it is. That is a record already in a calendar year for a batter in the same side as the second highest run-scoring batter. And the previous record was held by Roy Fredericks, who had 881 fewer runs than Viv Richards. However, Viv Richards in 1976 scored 1,760-odd runs. So at least Roy Fredericks scored 880-odd. Rory Burns has got 363. And people are wondering whether Rory Burns should be dropped. There's quite a few more candidates first before we get to Rory Burns.
Yeah.
But it tells you exactly. You said late era Brian Lara, and it feels like that. I thought what was terrific, though, was that there was a fear, actually, that Joe had lost his joie de vivre, that how are you going to be able to carry the burden? And in this series, he's been really sparkly,
joyous,
really jovial, joyous, utterly joyous, until they started bowling bounces at Jasprit Bumrah, and until he dropped a catch off Moeen Ali, and then his face
until he tried to
crumpled,
get
and
angry.
he looked like thunder.
He doesn't
until he tried to get angry.
He doesn't do angry very well. He's not very good at angry, and he looked absolutely shattered afterwards. Like, I've seen him lose a lot of Test matches, but I've never seen him look quite so distraught, because I think he knew that it was his tactical flaw. It was him in the first session of that last day putting 5 or 6 fielders on the fence to the 9 and the 10 so that you can bounce them. Bumrah averaged 3 coming into that innings. 3. You know, like there wasn't much to be afraid of. And if you can't run one through him, then you're doing something wrong. So, yeah, the idea that we'll get him caught at deep third or deep fine leg off the top edge, you probably don't need to. There are probably other ways to do it. So, yeah, I think, Root knew that he'd set that game up for England with his 180, and he'd also lost it for him on the last day, getting sucked into the sort of, you've got to stick up for your players sort of thing. I mean, Anderson's crankiness at his age, he should know better, He's been around long enough that he shouldn't be getting sucked into stuff like that.
I'll tell you something, because it's interesting you should mention that, because he did actually reference 2014 when the Indians came over. He got sucked into some verbals with Jadeja, you may recall, at Trent Bridge, and it all kicked off in the pavilion on the way back. And he referenced this, and he said, I learnt from that. I learnt that it's not good for my game. It doesn't work. It's not me, and I've learnt to just focus on what I do. And I think for the most part that's true. It is true, but he got wound up there. He did the classic elder statesman thing. It's like a kind of, guys, I'm a 39-year-old with 600 plus wickets. Show me some respect. Don't bounce me. Whereas I'm afraid he would also accept, if we'd taken a step back, you're playing in a test match. India have got to get you out. If Anderson lasts to the end of that day, England go out to bat on day 4. Mm-hmm. That takes up another 3 overs, apart from anything else. With Root on strike, it would have added some more runs as well. So, these tiny little margins in a 5-day game, you can add all them up and you can see how India just got over the line with 8.1 overs to spare. But you also got to factor in that moment, that over that Bumrah bowled, that 10-ball over with 4 no balls peppering him, and Anderson allowing himself to revert to 2014 Anderson, that was possibly in many ways the actual crucial moment in the game. And England are lucky that they're not playing back-to-back tests, actually, because they now got to regroup and somehow try and get that out of your head. I mean, that is a loss so devastating because they'd done so well to get back into it. And while we talk about Joe Root carrying the batting, I mean, a few words for Bairstow, who's looked like he's back in form. Butler and Moeen, they only scored 20s, but they added 50-plus with Root. They gave them the kind of support they needed. So the batting side was starting to come together. And then they've kind of undone all that work in a horror 51.5 overs that sends them back to square one. And it's easy to forget when something like that happens. England won 3 away test matches at the start of this year. 2 in Sri Lanka, 1 in Chennai, again off the back of Joe Root. Mm-hmm. They were flying high. And now what have they done? They've lost 3 in India, 1 to New Zealand, 1 to India again, and down they spiral. Mm-hmm. But knowing England, they'll bounce back in some ludicrous fashion and win at Leeds. It's been the way for the last few years.
They might if Ben Stokes was there, but I'm not sure if that'll happen otherwise.